Good afternoon and welcome to Driven Women TV. The purpose of Driven Women TV is to further the message and the mission of Cape Cod's Conference for Women that will come to you for the second year at the beautiful Seacrest Beach Hotel in beautiful North Falmouth. Today I am so excited because I'm here with Terri Arthur. She is the author of Fatal Decision, the story of Edith Cavell, and she is a nurse in the World War I era. So we're going to have just a candid conversation with Terri as we uncover the story of Edith Cavell. Her story is so just amazing and inspiring, and it sort of mirrors the modern day driven women that we find here on Cape Cod. So I am thrilled to be here with Terri today and share more of her story. Last year, Terri contacted us to be a vendor at Cape Cod's Conference for Women to share her story at a booth, and for whatever reasons it didn't happen last year, and then again this year she contacted us and wanted to come on board. So I'm really glad that you reconnected with us and that we'll have a chance not only to share with our viewing audience what is so wonderful about this book, but with women from all across Cape Cod in the state, and women come from all over to come to Driven Cape Cod's Conference for Women. So I'm just happy to have you here.
Thank you, Marie.
Terri, would you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background?
Well, my name is Terri Arthur, obviously. I am a nurse, and I live in East Falmouth. And I started out actually as a teacher. I taught sophomore biology and then went into nursing. I worked over at the emergency room at Martha's Vineyard Hospital for 9 years. I worked at the Falmouth ICU, CCU for a couple years, went up to Cape Cod Hospital for 27 years, worked in staff ed and various departments over there, emergency room and cardiac unit. And then I went up to Jordan. I worked at a cardiac step-down unit. Mm-hmm. I also own a business called Medical Education Systems, which does continuing ed. And in my spare time, I wrote the book that you have here today.
Perfect, yeah. And like you said, you have another profession. You do medical education.
Yes.
And you put on
continuing
workshops
programs,
and continuing education programs. Yeah. And when you discussed that with me, after Cape Cod's Conference for Women last year, you were an attendee. Mm-hmm. You called me and you wrote me something I'd love for you to share with our viewing audience because I was so moved by that comment.
Well, having done many of these programs, I understand the work that goes into putting these on. It's not only just a matter of putting on the speaker, but you've also got the food and the decor and all the details that go along with it to make people comfortable and to make it a class act. And I was very impressed with the program that you did last year, Marie, because I realized that every detail had been taken care of, from right down to the decor on the table, to the audio, to the handbags that were put out, to the decor on the stage. I was very impressed that every detail was taken through, and it really showed. Mm-hmm.
And I just want to thank you for that comment. Those kind of comments of what keeps the Driven Woman movement going. It's the collaboration of not only myself, but many women who come. And what we ask when people come on board with our planning is that they bring their best. They bring their skill set to the table. And what happens is that women come together and we inspire one another to really take it up a notch. So we're happy to have that comment, and we look forward to even bringing an even better program to you this year. So we hope all of you watching will consider attending the event. So let's get down to it, and let's talk about the book, Fatal Decisions. Mm-hmm. You did share with me the book, and here is the book for those of you who are wondering. This is a picture, I believe, of Edith Cavell. Is this her actual
Cavell? Yep.
Cavell?
Yep.
Her actual photo. And also, she has the book on a DVD series, which I am listening to, and it's a can't put down book. It's lengthy, but it's very moving, and there's suspense and drama and a little romance and a little education even in the book. So I just want to know, what brings someone like you from nursing to author?
Well, I get that question all the time. How did I go from nurse to novelist? When I came upon this story of Edith Cavell, I was so taken up with her story, not only because of what she did and who she was, but the fact that she was so well hidden. She was unknown. She really had disappeared in the ashes of history, and I couldn't understand that, and I thought, well, she's British, and that's probably why we don't know about Edith. But then I thought I had to be the only nurse in the world who had not known about her, but when I started to ask around, I couldn't find anyone who knew about her. So I didn't understand that either, but I decided that maybe because she was British, that we didn't know about her in America, but they would know about her in Britain. So I went to London to the statue that is dedicated to her off Trafalgar Square. It's a huge 45-foot statue. And I went to the two places that were right next to it. One was St. Martin's. There was a gift shop there. And on the opposite side was the portrait gallery. So I went to St. Martin's gift shop, and I asked them for a postcard to send home to say I found her. And they didn't know who I was talking about. And literally the statue is literally right outside the church. So then I went over to the portrait gallery looking for a postcard to send home, because people had heard me talking about her, and the clerk there didn't know I was talking about either. I literally asked her to look around behind the window behind her and look at the statue, and said to her, "Do you know who that statue is?" And she said no. So then I was shocked. I didn't understand how that could be. And then began to do the research over a period of 4 years. I took 4 trips to the UK, 2 trips to Belgium. And the question again is, how did you, go from stethoscope to pen? I began to take classes. As I said, I do these programs, and I work together with Steve Babitsky. We do occupational health and safety programs. He's here in Falmouth.
Sure.
And he is an interesting guy. He does a little bit of everything, but he started putting on programs called fiction writing for physicians. I asked him if I could go to the programs, and he said yes. I was the only nurse in 140 physicians. So I went to the programs, and they were the sort of the boilerplate of what you need to know to write a book. How do you write strong characters? How do you write riveting dialogue? How do you write a killer first chapter? How do you make the environment part of the story? How do you introduce information without informational dumping? What do you never do? You never kill the kid, you never kill the dog. And all those little tricks and traps that you need to know about writing. And what I said to myself is, I learned to be a nurse. I don't know what's more complicated than that, so I can learn to be a writer as well. So with his help in me going to those programs, certainly doing a lot of reading and attending anything I could that had to do with writing. But the other thing is that I love to write, and I've written magazine articles. A lot of times after work, I would just go home and write about my patients, just to write. So it was a natural transition for me.
Sure. And nursing is not just a profession, it's a calling, because it is a hard profession, and it involves people and caring not only for people but about people in order to do what you do with compassion. So Edith's story is, I just want to take the audience through her story because it's so compelling, and I did get a chance to listen to the audio version, most of it, and the story begins with her family and her leaving home at an early age and making a decision to go off to school, to nursing school, to become educated in the field of nursing. And I remember the book talking about her mother knowing that she was different. There's something different about this young woman. There was a strength of character, something that just wasn't just your standard woman, making a decision. And she had a real strength and a gumption that said, I'm leaving. Her mother's like, no, stay in the nest for a little while longer. And she says, no, I must go. So with very little money and very little of anything, really, her bag, and she went off to this nursing school, and just continue.
Well, it's interesting that the nursing school she picked, which is in Whitechapel. Whitechapel is a very poor section of London. It's immigrant-owned, immigrant living, a lot of people, immigrants living there. And the hospital she went to, which is the London Hospital at the time, it's now called the Royal London Hospital. Of course, everything in the UK is royal, you understand.
Sure.
And it would be equal to our old Boston City, that kind of thing. So they tended to a very difficult population, and she had a lot of choices to where she could have gone to nursing school. But she chose this one, which tells you something about her character. She wanted to be in a place where she could do the most good. And she knew that this was the most needy hospital that she could find, and that's why she enrolled there.
Amazing, yeah. And like I said, a lot of her story mirrors to me what the Driven Women's mission and their values are, and it just collaboration and empowerment. And she's very much that woman. So she goes off to this school, and she finds out really quickly that there was just a lot of work, a lot of standards. And I remember she referred to it as slavery at one point to her
Yes, she did.
instructors, because it was that hard. I think at that time, nurses, the profession hadn't evolved. We heard of Florence Nightingale, but not much else. And the work was really the bottom of the rung work, the cleaning and the taking care of things that maybe doctors just never would. And also being able to put up with the male-woman dynamic back then, where the woman was really underneath and kind of devalued in their work, and they were given the hard work. And not really a lot of the technical aspects of the profession. So she from the beginning showed that strength to really excel at what she did, really, and to want to learn and really stick to the rules without being. I think she always had a voice. She always spoke up in a way that wouldn't shut people off, but allow her to really express what she was feeling. Do you want to talk about her character and her story?
Well, yes, you characterized her beautifully, Marie. You know, it's interesting that we're talking about her at this time, because, as you know, this is Martin Luther King centennial, annual coming around. And I remember the wonderful speech that he gave called "I Have a Dream," which, interestingly enough, he never planned to actually say that in his speech initially, which I find interesting. But she had a dream, and her dream was that she wanted to be there for people who needed her. Her father had a cardiac issue, and that was what brought her to the bedside, and she realized that this was her calling, and that's what she wanted to do. And nothing was going to deter her from that. And she had chances of someone coming into her life who wanted to marry her, which she said no. She wanted to be like Florence Nightingale, and she wanted to devote herself to her work and to caring for the people who were in need. And that was, throughout the entire book and throughout everything she did, that goal, that dream, continued to push her forward. The confidence that she could do this, and the need to do what it was that she felt to fulfill her life.
Sure. And that story, like I said, it just so mirrors the driven woman here on Cape Cod. In my story in particular, bringing Cape Cod's first conference for women to Cape Cod was a first for me. And to be able to put out a call to action to other women, that women could respond and gather around my dream, because it is just that, it's a dream.
Yes.
And when you ignite that dream and put it into action, and then call out for some help, there's amazing things that could happen. And it's like I said, it's more than a profession, it's a calling. And like Dr. King and like Edith Cavell, you can't stop if you wanted to, even in the face of danger, in the face of ridicule, in the face of adversity, in the face of lack of resources, like we see over and over again in this book with her. There's something that drives you, like the driven woman, to continue to get it done. And so let's continue on with the story. So she leaves home, she gets educated in a nursing school, and her teacher gave her an evaluation. I love this part, that was less than flattering. And you and I talked about that and what it did for her, and what it did was set her on a course, I think, to reach her potential. Sometimes when people put roadblocks in your way, it makes you work harder. So the evaluation that she received from her teacher was less than flattering, which caused her not to be able to get hired at other institutions, which made her have to stay in this really hard hospital to get really solid, hard training, which made her stronger.
Yes.
So talk about that.
Well, the head of the school, her name was Eva Lux. She was the matron of the school. And in many ways, she was ahead of her time as well, in that she wanted resources toward her school, and she wanted to get the profession of nursing to move forward from the old Sari Gump image of the Charles Dickens days. And she was very hard on her students. And when it came time for graduating, she usually was unflattering in her evaluations. She was unflattering all the way through, but she felt that if she was gave them good evaluations, she went through, that they would feel like they had arrived, or had done what they need to do, and would not push further. So when she was about to graduate, the evaluation that she gave her was actually less than flattering. You're absolutely right. And knowing that with a evaluation that was not good, that she would never get a job anywhere else. And so what she would do then is she would say, well, yes, but then I have a position for you. And she would put these new graduates on a ward which was called the Mellish ward, which the nurses called the hellish ward, because it was one of the worst wards in the hospital. And that's how she got it staffed. But Edith saw it as a challenge, and she learned a lot by doing this. And it made her stronger, and it made her go forward even more knowledgeable, and as even a better nurse.
Mm-hmm. And that's the story of many women. Despite challenges, challenges of raising a family, despite economic disadvantage or educational disadvantage, sometimes these things in our lives make us stronger. They make us work harder. They make us seek out the information that we could need to go further, just like the conference. And that's one of the reasons for the conference, and the things that I have planned for this year. You will be able to draw a line from education to employment. We'll have businesses there like the Graduate School of Natural Studies will have SCORE for business development there. We will have a couple of businesses that will be doing some searching for employees. We'll have headshots for women to take professional headshots to get ready with help with resume writing, and we'll have some coaching to get women to move in the right direction and where they need to go. So I think it's important, and sometimes, a lot of times, those things make us stronger so we can get to the next level, and that's important. So that really worked in her favor, even though she was set up for failure.
Yes.
And I see that time and time again in the book for her with that. So there was a chapter in the book where there was a male doctor, and he came on to his shift only and with some nurses who were, I guess they were nuns, correct?
Yes.
And he came onto a shift to find the patients being underserved. There were patients who didn't get pain medications, patients who didn't get their dressings changed, their bedpans changed, they had bed sores, they were crying out in pain, and he was livid. I remember that chapter. Yes. And they were being cared for by nuns. And the nuns were not trained as nurses. They just didn't have the skill set and the resources and the wherewithal to take care of that caseload. So I want you to really talk about what happened after that, and what that course that set for.
Well, you have to remember that at this point we're in Belgium.
Okay.
And this is a Belgian physician.
Okay.
And his name is DePage. He's a surgeon, and he's very proud of his work. And he realizes that no matter how good his surgery is, that the patients suffer post-operatively because of all of these things that you mentioned, and untrained nurses. And the nurses who are working at nighttime, it's expected they will also have a day job, and it's expected they will sleep all night long while at the hospital. So when he comes in the morning to do his rounds, the patients are in tough situations. They're lying in their excrement, they're crying in pain, as you said, their dressings are bloody, they've not been changed, and on and on. And he is quite upset. So he goes to the superior mother, and he says that he needs the nurses that he has trained. He's tried to train them himself. And the nurses that he has trained, where are the nurses that he's trained? And she says, well, I've moved her off. She's taking care of the garden. And of course, he's quite upset. He says she needs to take care of patients and not plants. And the Mother Teresa, who doesn't like him very much because he is a hot-headed surgeon, and she loves just putting her thumb down on him, and she says, well, that's just too bad because they belong to me and I'll do whatever I choose. So he goes home, grousing to his wife and calling her Mother Warthog and saying that what is he to do. And his wife, who is very situated in high society, remembers some of her friends are in contact with some children that have grown up but had Edith as a governess many, many years ago, knowing that Edith knew French there and had been there in Belgium at one point in Brussels. So she says, what if we write a letter to her, because we're now 10 years out, and she's been a supervisor and she's taught, and ask her to come down to bring in the Florence Nightingale type of training. Mm-hmm. And she brings together actually a committee of women. And these are business women who decide to fund this operation. Fund her salary, fund the building and the students and all that needs to be done. So this did not start out by a grant. It did not start out by a hospital board of directors. It didn't start out by some big charity. It started out by a group of women who sat around in her living room and listened to the story and said that yes, that they would fund this and they would move this forward. And that was how it got started.
Sure.
And a lot of ways that's, with the Driven Women, that's how a lot of women get started, is by connecting. And that's one thing that you do with your members and the people who come in, is to show them how they can get connected. Because part of what you do is the networking, which is so very much important.
Sure. With
this. And through the networking, they did indeed bring Edith Cavell in. The interesting thing is that while the committee was quite willing to fund, the ball was dropped a bit on DePage's part, because he's a surgeon, he wasn't paying attention to these other things. Mm-hmm. And they put her in front of a row house of four apartment buildings and said, this is where you need to create a school, a living quarters, a clinic, and a laboratory. And when she went in, the place was in very poor condition. The windows were broken, the rugs were threadbare, there was dust everywhere, there was mouse excrement on the floor, it was just awful. And she looked to Marie DePage, his wife, and said, how can we do this? And she said, well, we better figure it out because you've got 4 weeks. Mm-hmm. The students come in 4 weeks. Mm. Now, one of the things is that she's very religious. Her father was an Anglican vicar, mm-hmm. and she goes to the back there's a little garden in the back, and she sits back there and she prays for help. Mm-hmm. And she feels that she has a goal. Mm-hmm. She is indeed a driven woman. Mm-hmm. She has a dream, mm-hmm. and she realizes that if she can pull this off, that this is where she needs to be. This is how she can move her dream and her goal further. Mm-hmm. She can introduce a whole new profession mm-hmm. into this country that has never seen it before. Mm. And indeed, in 4 weeks, she pulls it off. She gets the curriculum. She, in fact, even designs the uniform mm-hmm. and the cap. It's very different from the previous caps. It's not the flying nun type of cap. It's a cap that can be washed. It's made out of linen. Mm-hmm. A sensible uniform. And she gets people to teach it. And she introduces a whole new profession in a foreign country, in a foreign language, against a culture that doesn't really understand why she's doing it. So in many ways, she has done everything Florence Nightingale has done, but even more so. Mm-hmm. There's an old joke about the two dancers, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. Mm-hmm. That Ginger Rogers did everything Fred Astaire did, only backwards in high heels. Right. She did everything Florence Nightingale did in another country, in another language, wow. with a culture that was not accepting for this. Mm-hmm.
That is just an amazing story to me, and like I said, it mirrors the Driven Women movement, and I think not unique to just Driven Women here in, right here on Cape Cod, but probably all over the world. When women decide to get together and to band together, not without men, mind you, there's always the need for men and women to get together to collaborate, but right now we're talking about women. But that was called the committee, correct?
Yes, it was called the women, it called the committee.
The committee.
There was one committee member who did not agree to this, mm-hmm. and said that if the Catholic Church wasn't for this, as she saw that this was a threat to her business and she would not go forward. But the others soldiered on and did what needed to be done.
And isn't that always the way? There may be naysayers in the bunch, but I think when you do the work and you prove the work, then the credibility rises and people come on board. And sometimes, just like with Cape Cod's Conference for Women, some people needed to see the work and to feel and touch the work and say, okay, now I believe. And that's common, and that's okay. I just love that story, how the women came together and financed, and it's so like the story that we have here when we have our weekly meetings. Like you said, it's about networking, it's about collaboration, it's about bringing women together and knowing that when you come together, there's always going to be someone in the room that has what you need, or something they need you have, when you open yourself up and share and are not threatened by the process. I think women can collaborate and empower one another in ways that men often can't, even, because we have a particular something about us that we're built with, right? A particular compassion, a particular ability to multitask and to thrive under certain conditions as women. So when I read that part of the story, it really hit home with me, and how we get together and we drive this thing. We say, okay, there's a need, and how are we going to fund this? I know that this year, it's a whole nother year, moving into another year, and I just made a commitment that if I can't fund it the traditional ways with sponsorship, and thank God I did get some on and can always use more, but if I couldn't do it with, let's say, big banks or corporation, that I would build this conference woman by woman. So we started a thing called Partners and asked the women to have some buy-in. We would link you to our website and allow people, when they're shopping for tickets or information, they go to websites, and we give social media shout outs to one another, so that people are getting the information and going onto websites and finding out more about other businesses. So there's win-wins that come into play when you collaborate and open up. And I'm just intrigued by the 4 weeks of cleaning and organizing and designing a uniform to be able to open on schedule. Again, I think it's a calling, much more than just a job, but she had a calling and a mission to do that. So let's move on with the story. So she opens the school and begins to train women in a foreign country, foreign language, in ways that they've never seen before, to really solidify this as a profession. You talked about her up-leveling the profession and bringing in a more technical piece to it for nurses. Talk about that.
Well, the training up to this point did not necessarily have a lot of the background that we have today. So she really moved the profession of nursing forward. In other words, she included classes such as microbiology and anatomy and physiology and the dynamics, the physical dynamics, so that when nurses made decisions, they would have that background and would understand what was going on behind. And that was unique to her. So had she not done all the other things that she had done, and not only done this alone, that would be enough to make her at least as equally important as Florence Nightingale. Interesting enough, she ran into problems with the Belgians because they did not understand why they needed to do this, because the nuns were doing it for nothing. So her school actually became an international school. And she had very few Belgian students, and she had mostly international students from Switzerland and France and Germany and from all over. However, the unforeseen happened, which turned this all around. The Queen of Belgium broke her arm. And the Queen's father was a surgeon, and she knew that the important thing in getting this arm working again would be the aftercare. And she went to the public hospital where they were working out of, because they couldn't work out of the Catholic hospitals. And this is where the royalty usually went, was to the Catholic hospital. So she broke tradition, and she went to the city hospital where Edith Cavell's nurses would take care of her. And when that happened, the Belgian women said, well, if it's good enough for the Queen, it's good enough for us. And then her school really began to take off.
Perfect. Sometimes
Yeah.
you need just that one
Sometimes
thing, or that one
unforeseen
person
thing that happens.
Yeah, or that one person to believe in you, or that one person of influence to believe in what you're doing, to be able to use that influence to set things in another course. And I see that a lot in this book, that some of the circumstances of Edith's life set the world on fire, really. And we'll talk about that, just like Dr. King and his I Have a Dream, and people like that. And sometimes there's unsung heroes, you know, like Edith, and you uncovered that story and are determined to spread that to as many people as you can. And we're just glad that you'll be at Cape Cod's Conference for Women with your book. She's hearing this for the first time, actually, because we have been contacted by so many vendors that want to come and vend on that day, that the room has sold out a while ago. But I feel we can make space for something so riveting, you know, a real, you know, a timely story about a real driven woman who is, you know, who women will really be able to relate with, like I have. So I'm just pleased to know you and being aware of this book. And you know, the best thing for me about bringing Cape Cod's Conference for Women to this area has been the women that I meet, and the compelling stories of what they're doing and how they're changing their communities, how they're building businesses from the ground up and really dedicated to working, and then not only doing it, but looking back and giving to giving other young women a shot, you know, to do it again. So we're going to have a big component of that this year, where the Atria right here in Falmouth has sponsored a table, and Integrata Architecture has sponsored a student to be able to come to the conference to enjoy and to be inspired by women like yourself and what you have accomplished. You know, there may be a young woman writer in the crowd who says, wow, you did this, you're a nurse, and you've gone from nurse to novelist, maybe I could too. So we're just pleased to have that. So let's continue with the story. And so she set it at this school in Belgium against all odds, and now she has some credibility working on the Queen of Belgium. And what happens?
Well, as usual, when we have our goals and we're moving forward, there's always something that pushes back. And for her, it was something that had never happened before in the history of the world. No one could have guessed that this would have happened, but World War I broke out. Now, at the time she was at home celebrating her mother's birthday, she could have stayed home. And everybody begged her not to go back into a war zone. But her goal was to make that work, was to bring this profession forward, and she wasn't going to abandon it. And against all odds, she went back against the tide of people who were leaving Belgium. She went back into Belgium and went back to her school and pulled it together. And a lot of the nurses had to leave because they were from other countries, and the war was on. And so she only worked with a handful of nurses at this point. And the school itself had kind of been put on hold. The school had done so well that they were actually in the middle of a building program. They were building a new school. But she had to be very careful about how much time and energy she put into that. And what happened is they turned her clinic and her hospital into a Red Cross hospital, and she began to work for the Red Cross into these places. So she ended up taking care of German soldiers just as well as she took care of Allied soldiers as well. And in her mind, it didn't make any difference. A patient was a patient. A person who needed her help got her help. And it didn't make any difference if they were German or Irish or British or anything else. And that was, she saw humans as human beings. She didn't see them as nationalities or in the divisive way in which we put people. So that's as the war went on, things got to be very difficult, obviously, in the war. The resources were scarce. This kind of thing went on. But she got approached by the underground asking if she would work with them to help rescue Allied soldiers. They wanted to get soldiers from the French front, where all the fighting was going on, into Brussels, because Brussels was in the center of the country, and then hook them up with guides and get them up into the Netherlands, which was a neutral country. Now, this is totally out of her purview. She's never done anything like this before.
Mm-hmm.
But she realizes that thousands of people have put their life on the line, and she says, if they have been willing to do this, then how can I do any less?
Mm-hmm.
Which soldier can I turn away?
Mm-hmm.
I can't turn any of them away.
Mm-hmm.
So she agrees to do something she's never done before in her life, and she works with the underground to rescue Allied soldiers.
Mm-hmm. So again, she goes against the tide, and she takes a chance and a risk, and again, a calling. Because I don't think when she left home, what was she, 19 years old, or
she was in her early 20s.
Early 20s?
Yeah.
That she really saw all that would come her way and all the things that she would be set in motion for her life. Yeah. And I know her mom saw something special in her back then as she was leaving, even above her other, 3 sisters and brothers?
Yes.
Yeah. So
3 sisters, 1 brother.
Yeah. She was different. She stood out, and she was determined, and I think she was led by conviction, you know. So now we have her stepping out in going against the tide once again, and taking care of those that she felt she needed to. And then tell us what happens.
Well, she did this knowing that she was putting her life at risk.
Mm-hmm.
There were signs all over Brussels saying that if anyone took in an Allied soldier, that their life would be at risk. They would definitely be arrested.
Mm-hmm.
And she knew this.
Mm-hmm.
She was doing something she had never done before, but she, by the courage of her convictions, and by her goal and by her unwillingness to allow any soldier who came to her to turn them away, that his life would be at stake. She took him in and she hooked him up with guides and got him into the Netherlands. Over the period of 9 months, she rescued just under 1,000 soldiers. The ironic thing is that the Germans put a headquarters right across the street from her clinic. And literally underneath their noses, she did this. She was able to get people in, and she hid them in the coal cellar. She put them up in the attic. She put them in the beds and had them faked as that they were patients. And then she would hook them up with guides, and then she would, and they would be safe. What she had them do is she gave them a postcard, and on the postcard she wanted them to send it back when they were safe, because she wanted to know that they had gotten safe, and that if they were to address it, they were to sign it Cousin Lucy, so that if any of these cards ever were intercepted, it would just say Cousin Lucy, and she would say, "It's my cousin writing back to me." So that was her game plan of keeping track of them. She also set up a diary of sorts of everybody that she took care of, and would write down their name and their rank, because she assumed that after the war she would go back and look them back up again.
Wow. A real life Harriet Tubman.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, very much so.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, so this sounds like an incredible amount of research that you had to have undertaken, and you're a driven woman indeed yourself to be able to be committed to such a project, to see the value of keeping her story alive, for allowing people to know. How many statues do we walk by in our own communities, not really connecting and knowing the story? You know, Kathleen Lee Bates on the green there in Falmouth, and we walk by and we don't really know the story and the history and what the contribution is. And I applaud you for taking that on and bringing to light. I've met, actually, I've known several nurses right here in our community, and since contacting you a few days ago about doing the story, I've just asked them, do they know of you in particular? And even when they didn't know your name particularly, they knew of the book and of the story. So that's to your credit that they lit up and like, I know of that story, and I thought that was great, you know. But this folder here that I have contains lots of great reviews that were written for you and for the book, and a citation that you recently got.
Got a citation from the State House, signed by our own representative Vieira and DeLeo. It also got the Midwest Independent Publishers Award. That's what this little badge is here. That means my publisher is in Wisconsin, and that's how I got that. She submitted the book. That was 12 states, 90 publishers, over 400 submissions, and it won for historical fiction, even though it's not a fiction, but it's in a novel format, so they call it a fiction.
Wow.
So I can't get out from underneath that label, whether I like it or not.
Awesome.
Because I worked very hard in the research. You're absolutely right. The research took me to many places I could have never gone before. My office has got shelves and shelves and shelves of books that I've used. This is some of the books that I've used here. This one here is her meditation book, and it is The Imitation of Christ. This is an exact replica of that book, and this is her writing here in the book about it. And I mentioned this book in my book, and I highlighted certain passages because she highlights them. You can see that she's made markings and things in this. So I didn't highlight anything that she didn't highlight. And I tried as much as possible to stay as close to the story as I possibly could.
Sure.
And this is one of the resources
she was a
that I
very
used.
spiritual woman, a religious woman.
Yes. This is it was a very helpful book. This was written by Jacqueline Van Til, who was one of her nurses, who was with her the last 5 years of her life. And interestingly enough, this book has been signed by Jacqueline Van Til.
Wow.
And
is that an original?
This is an original, yep. This was, she did this in 21. This is a picture of Jacqueline Van Til here. And the beauty of this book is that she writes firsthand experience. She writes in dialogue, and she writes scenes that actually happened. So when I wrote the book, I included those as much as possible. Anywhere that I found true dialogue, I included that in the book. So people say, well, of course it's a fiction, you made this stuff up. But they had to talk about what was going on around them. I didn't have them talking about something far out. And anytime I could incorporate that and get the vein of what they were talking about, I would do that and then just take it from there. This book was interesting, and this book is an example of many things that happened to me in strange ways. This book I found in a really weird place. I found this book in a barn. And what happened is I had gotten to the middle of the book where the Germans had come in, and I couldn't find any information on the German officers. I looked in the library, I looked in the internet, I looked in all of my World War I books, couldn't find anything. And I was stuck. And I went, my God, I've gotten halfway through this book, I can't stop writing, what am I going to do? So I did what people do in the summertime. I went off and did some yard sailing, and I came across this barn. And I asked if he had anything in World War I in the barn, and he said no. But I went in, and of course, way in the back of the barn, I found this box of books. And there was dust and all over it. And I first I blew off one book, and it was a book on World War I airplanes, young adult. And I went, well, I can learn something from that. Then I picked up this book, and it was called Headquarters Nights by Vernon Kellogg. And I picked it up, and I looked, and it was a record of conversations and experiences at the headquarters of the German Army in France and Belgium, 1914, 1915. So this book was exactly what I needed. He was having conversations, he worked with them, he was managing the fund for the Belgium that was put out by Herbert Hoover, and he had to deal with them in order to disseminate the food.
Wonderful. I don't want to give away the end of the book because then people wouldn't have impetus to read it. And I'm just, it's just a compelling, wonderful story written by a local driven woman here, Terri Arthur. And I just would recommend that you would find it in our local bookstores here on Cape Cod and share the story, because it is just a beautiful story, well written, and I'm just so glad to know you. And I just want you to share with the audience the big what's next for you in a couple of minutes before we close.
Well, there's a couple of things that are coming on. I'm writing a children's book that's been written, and it's being illustrated right now by Elizabeth Mosian, and that's going to be coming out. But the thing that's even bigger than that is I'm writing a screenplay on this book. Everybody who reads the book says to me it needs to be a movie, and it reads that way. It's very visual. And I'm working with Jan Worthington, who lives down in Wellfleet. She's got 35 screenplays under her belt. And we're moving forward with that. So that's that is my winter project. I do have 2 people that is connected with BBC who's very interested and told me that once it's written, to please send it over to them. They interviewed me this last October. They were BBC radio, and but they said they were very connected with the BBC TV producers, and that of course they would want their hero to be made a movie out of. So they've given me their email, and I keep in touch with them as we move forward. And hopefully, who knows, maybe they'll hopefully they'll pick it up.
So we'll be so fortunate to have you at Cape Cod's Conference for Women first before you make it to the big time in the big screen. You're on FCTV, so we're happy to have you and know that this level of talent and inspiration exists right here in Falmouth on Cape Cod, the home of Cape Cod's Conference for Women, and we'll have a chance to see you, more of you, and to be able to purchase the book and just get a little more background on exactly what you're doing next, being such a driven woman. So again, I'm so happy and just proud to know you and in the good work that you've done. And I know there's just so much more of this here on Cape Cod, that there are so many more women that have dreams and aspirations and things that they want to move forward. And I think together, when we get together and collaborate and share one another's stories, that those things will continue to happen, and we'll continue to meet women. So again, my guest today is Terri Arthur. She is the author of Fatal Decision, the story of Edith Cavell, a World War I nurse. And it's just a wonderful story. So grab a copy and cuddle up on these cold winter days.
Should I tell them there's a warning that comes with the book?
Sure.
It keeps people awake till 2 o'clock in the morning, so if you're not ready to stay awake.
And you can purchase your tickets for Cape Cod Conference for Women at www.capecodsconferenceforwomen.com. And we hope to see you there. Get your ticket today.